Good. So, normally we have normal models like the UML. Now, the thing with the
Yeah.
UML is that the UML is basically assuming you are drawing like a specific kind of diagrams. For instance, we have the flowchart diagram, we have the UML diagrams, we have the class diagrams. Now, these diagrams, they're all model. They're different kind of model, right? But we're not talking about the UML model over here. Now, what I'm going to be showing you is a different kind of model. It's called the C4 model. So now, what does the
Okay.
C4 mean? The C4 model simply stands for 4C. So this is the 4C, second one, third one, and fourth. So now let's start from this one over here, this 4C. So now this 4C now means context. So let's come back here. So for instance now, this is the OKEGBOT organization. I'm going to switch over from OKEGBOT and I would head over to Real Naps organization. This is the Real Naps organization over here. So on the Real Naps organization, I'm going to head over to the Real Naps brand. Now, the difference between these diagrams and that of the UML diagrams, of like flowcharts, sequence diagrams, and the rest. Could you tell me any big difference between this one and those diagrams,
The difference is the method they are being drawn because um, should I say in the aspect of the design structure is in the structure, the design structure.
Okay. Now, the major difference between a C4 model and your normal models is that a C4 model is nested. Your normal models are not. Let me show an example. So let's head over to Whimsical. So let's assume I want to create a probably maybe a flowchart or something, right? So if I was to create a flowchart, it should be something like this. Oh, sorry, like something like
Yes.
this. Good. So on this flowchart now, you can say, okay, you know what? This one comes in here. Then we know what this is, a conditional statement. And this one, is it
Yeah.
yes? Is it no? If it's yes, blah, blah, blah. Can I double click this agent? Like, can I
No, no,
enter
no,
inside the agent to see what is inside the
no, no.
agent? Good. Now that is the
Flowchart can do that.
difference. Yes. Normal board, your normal Figma board, your normal Miro board, your normal Whimsical board, they only show you like these images on a landscape, but you cannot nest into it. Now this is the difference between it and a C4 model. On a C4 model, the first C over here is called context. So if I take you back over here now, you can see this is the context, which is the general landscape. Inside this context, we have the data miner, which we all know is the one that mines the data. Now it gives that data to the routing engine. Now, every single one of this thing right now is actually called an object. We can call it an object, we can call it a service. Some people like calling it service. So you can say it's a distributed service or it's a microservice. But basically, they are all
Okay.
objects. Right, good. So now this is where C4 comes in. C4 says that your first layer is your context. But now each time you enter each time you look at this context, you can see different containers or objects, you know, inside of it. So now let's go into one of these containers or one of these objects. So we'll go into the data miner now. Good. Now we've entered inside the data miner container, right? Now, the data miner now has two apps at the moment. If you look at here, you can see an app called Puppeteer Scraper, another app called API from Bookmarker. So now we have two different, components. But now, are we done? No, we're not done yet. If we wanted to go inside again, We can now go inside again to now know specifically what practically works on it. So let's head back to the drawing board. The first one is called context. So this one is the general overview of the whole system. The second one is called container. So that whole general system now, the different services that are there. Each of those services, you can call them a container. Now, the moment you enter inside the container, you will now have components. These components are basically what is inside the container. So let me make it make sense to you. Now, this one now, like I said, is the context. We're seeing the whole diagram. Now, this is one of the container inside the diagram, and inside the diagram there is components. But now you'll be asking yourself, what is this last C? This last C now is now actually the one we now call code. So the C4 model is divided into four. Um, what is it called again? Context, which is the 4C. Container, context diagram, which is the 4C. Container, which is inside that C, and components, which is the one that is inside the container, and then finally code. So, but here now we don't use code on the level 4C, right? So what we use here is markdown. So this other section now, you can just call this one markdown. Now, what is the task that you would have to do today? Now let's go back to, for instance, OKEkbot. So I'm going to take you to OKEkbot now, right? So on OKEkbot, we created um, something similar to what we did at Raynaps. So at OKEkbot, we have the home, which is the ordinary page. We have the user browser clients. We have the desktop app, the one you install on your computer. But specifically, we now have the system API system. So just to really explain something, so we don't forget it. This context now, what it shows you is every single repo, every single service. In fact, let's don't call it repo, let's call it service. Every single service that that particular organization has in their technology infrastructure. So you can call a C4 model an infrastructural diagram. It means if this is a firm, if this is an organization, what are the different services that they all run that make their system working, right? So now on OKEkbot, we have the user. For instance, this is OKEkbot user. You can see we called it an actor. So the OKEkbot user can either use the web home, which is the normal website. You can either use the clients, or you can either use the desktop app. What you're supposed to be doing for me is to model them properly. So let me show what I mean by model them properly. For instance, this diagram is not properly modeled properly. Where it says home, if I click here, you can see where it says add brief description. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, now I can come here and say this this is www.okekbot.com. Now, this page shows the OKEkbot portfolio, its products and services. Now, at the bottom here, I could put in the GitHub link of this particular repo. So all the engineers at the firm, if they come to this canvas, our context, they can see not just the distributed system, but a key description of what that system does. Now let's head over to something a
Okay.
bit more meaningful. Can you see this one over here? The OKEkbot
Yes,
user
I can see it.
API. Okay, good. Now
Yes, I
inside
can see it.
this API system, we have the three major components inside that system, inside that container. We have the router, the database, and the controller. Now, if I zoom in on the router, you can see where it says this is the router that contains all the endpoints within the OKEkbot system. Now, if I zoom inside the router, what kind of endpoints does OKEkbot have? So I'll zoom in. Now, this is an example of one of the endpoints. If I click on this endpoint, you can see things like endpoint for, these are the couple of endpoints you can see under user accounts. So
Okay.
register, login, forget password, blah blah blah. But more importantly, if you pay attention to here, you will see that all these ones are under the API user account. So from this account now, you can now start creating what we call sub markdown. So for instance, let me give an example. What we're currently viewing at the moment is called user account. So inside this router, let me zoom out again so it makes sense. This is OKEkbot as a whole. Inside OKEkbot, we're going inside the back end system, which is the API system. Inside the API system, we're heading over now to the router. Inside the router, we just created one, which is the user account. Now, inside this user account, we can start describing what the user account is all about. It's a collection of all the endpoints for accounts. For instance, endpoint for registering accounts, endpoint for logging in, forgot password, reset password, change API key. Everything has to do with the person's account. This is where you're going to list them. So what you do as the engineer, your own job is to properly list the data. Say for instance, you come here and you say for instance, you come here and you say, um um register. So on this register now, you're supposed to give us what we call a pseudo API, because you build the system, they implement the system. Say for instance, we have decided that the endpoint will be called api.okegbots.com. So our back end system of the okegbots, the full back end system, which is this one over here, what we're going to call it now will be api.okegbots.com. Now I can see this is the central um, API engine, right? Now I want you to see something. If I view here, you can see this is www.okegbot.com. The page shows the Okegbot portfolio, its products and services. You can link the GitHub repo that project is over here. Right, we're not working on that one now, because if not, we could have gone into that one and described more on the components inside. But however, if you look at this one we just created now, this is api.okegbo.com. This is the central API engine. Now I can put in that our backend repo over here. But now this is now where it gets better. When we zoom inside it, we now have the router. When we zoom inside the router, we now have the different category. So how I want us to do it is this, for instance. Say for instance on OKEkbots, on the back end, which is our back end over here, we're going to have something like user accounts. Now, these user accounts now we have all the endpoints that one could call to sign up, to log in, to forget password, to reset password, to delete accounts, all of them, all the things that have to do with user accounts. This is the endpoints. We can have another one now called user transaction. So this will contain things like view transaction, change payment method, billing method, you know, blah 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 blah. We can have something like user support. You can now see things like create tickets, view tickets, close tickets. Now every single thing that has to do with the customer, which is the OKEkbot user, and getting support from the system. Now, this whole thing I just mapped out here now, they will be called our router, which is our routing component. So if we head back now to Ronaps, we only have one over here. And that one we have now is the user account. So let's say I want to add another one. I can add another one now called I can add another router now. Say for instance the um user transaction. So just like we said, the user transaction now contains everything for transaction. We can come here now, we can add the product details. Now, if you remember on the front page, like we said, customers can come to the okekbot.com, www.okekbot.com. They can view the pricing, the portfolio, the futures. All those things are part of the product details. Now, however, if I click on these product details now, this is where I can come here now to now say, this is a collection of all endpoints that returns data on the OKEkBot products, right? Now, below here, this side now, is where you can now start saying something like pricing. So let's say the API is API api.okegbots.com, api.okegbots.com forward slash user. Okay, no, not user. You can see where it does two column. Did you notice something? Let me explain what I'm talking about. Inside here now, there are two column. So where it says user means inside the router forward slash okay api.okegbo.com forward slash user forward slash accounts.
Mm.
Then anything after that forward
Yeah.
slash accounts will now be the this thing. The same thing happens to product details. So for product details now it will be api.com forward slash products forward slash details. So now this could now be forward slash pricing forward slash futures. So each of them the customer calls, or each of them that the client's page calls, the endpoint gets returned. So this component now, this one is for OKEkBots. Now let's go back to your real apps because I wanted to show you from what we did on OKEkBots. On RainApps
Yeah.
now, we had our SRS, which is our software requirement specification, but it wasn't properly defined. Like it wasn't properly detailed. So because it was not properly detailed, we don't really even know the full endpoints we'll be having at RainApps. We're supposed to have both HTTP endpoints and socket endpoints because the automated betting software we're going to be creating right now, the desktop app would need to connect to the sockets. Before then, that was how I was doing it, but we need to set it up where it will be properly done. So your task for today is to work on the um, RealNav's web API. So on the RealNav's web API now, we currently have these other ones. So these ones now you don't really need to touch them. But what you will need to create right now is the router, right? So let me call it our traditional router so it doesn't confuse you. So under this router now, you're going to have obviously the different categories of services that the endpoint will be allocated to. So if we zoom in inside here, we want to nest one step in now, right? So if we nest one step in and create a new one, we're now inside the router. So what kind of components do we need? That means what kind of APIs do we need? So saying it from here, from my like while talking to you right now, I can create my first component and I can call this one user. So it will now do api.renaps.com forward slash user forward slash. I can now do account. So this will now be where we're going to keep everything around accounts from the endpoints to login, endpoints to register, endpoints to, blah, 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 and the rest. So now you would first of all create all the routers, right? Now I want you to create all the routing components, both that of the admin and that of the user. Now, doing it here might be a bit Oh, sorry. This was supposed to be a tutorial. Hold on, please. Oh,